the Mindset Athlete Podcast, and I'm your host, James Roberts. I'm a two-time Paralympian and owner of James Robert Fitness, which is an online training, nutrition, and mindset coaching business. First of all, I'd like to thank Lauren Williams for suggesting this quote to the show. An athlete is a mindset. It's how you prepare, think, and execute. Not because of some elite status or physical stature. Anybody can be an athlete. By Chris Harth. And each week on the Mindset Athlete, we like to bring you inspirational athletes, a message, or experts talking about human optimization to teach you how to change your perception of your mindset and become 1% better. And on today's show, I've got David Harrell. He's community outreach for Camp No Limits. So welcome onto the show, David.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks.
Oh, the pleasure is absolutely all mine. So obviously we were talking about it before we came on to do this recording today about obviously our own personal experiences and how I'd kind of found Camp No Limits. But beyond the initial introduction that I've given you, David, are there any little bits and nuggets that you'd like to share with my audience?
Well, yeah, I think first and foremost, just a little bit about Camp No Limits. Camp No Limits is a camp for kids with limb difference and limb loss and their families. And our mission is to educate, empower, and support those kids with limb difference to live a healthy and fulfilling lifestyle. But what I love about our camp and the way it's a little bit different than some of the other camps out there is that we include the whole family. The idea is that the family is there. We also include siblings. So we sort of have a program for our siblings because I think I grew up with limb difference. I was born without my right hand. And I have two younger brothers. And I realized, we never talked about what their experience was. So this is what I love about our camp is giving some space for siblings to sort of talk about and realize what their feelings are. Also for the siblings to see a lot of other kids who might look like their brother or sister and be like, oh, right, I'm not the only one as well. So our camps, we started in 2004 with 4 families. And now we have over 10 camps all across the country, and we serve hundreds of families every year. So we have a wide variety of camps, which is really exciting. So that's kind of the core of I guess our conversation. And I think you found this camp, and we sort of come from a occupational therapy and physical therapy mindset. We were founded. Our founder's an occupational therapist, and I think her initial the way that she sort of came up with this idea is a kid came into her office who was missing 3 limbs. And she was working with him and trying to figure out now how can we make sure that this young person is using his body the most effective way. And she came in contact with some folks who were prosthetists, and they kind of worked on how prosthetics could enhance that opportunity for that young kid. And then she started thinking, where's an opportunity for this kid just to be a kid? Where can this guy, he was 2 or 3 at the time, but as he begins to get a little bit older, where's a place for him to learn some of these, not only lessons in how to adapt and how to use his body in the best possible way, but also to connect with other people that may be like him and to find support that way. So this idea kind of came about a camp for kids with limb difference. And again, started with 4 families. And it just continued to grow and continue to grow and continue to spread out. And now, we're having a generation of kids who've kind of come through this camp and are now young adults and accomplishing amazing things and finding their own voice. And that's a super exciting thing to be. And I think as we were sort of talking briefly, as we were beginning, I think it's super exciting to see that this generation has kind of come through this world of having role models and having their experiences reflected back to them, what they're going to be able to accomplish is really going to be fascinating to watch.
Do you think it's also easier to put, and obviously put some into context of what we were discussing for the listeners? Is
sure.
You think because it's very much, well, first and foremost, commonplace. You've got the likes of Instagram, Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
It's become normalized to see somebody with a limb difference, somebody who's got a congenital disability, so it kind of levels the playing field. Whereas you go back to the days of when we were growing up, you were kind of in a bubble until you came across that other individual, and you kind of think to yourself, well, I'm not alone in this world to having to deal with this I won't even call it a difficulty, but be it, generally speaking, people will come and say your upbringing was adverse. Generally speaking, that will be most people who are able-bodied. Some may say that from the disabled community as well, but they probably have acquired their how would I put it? Their I don't want to call it a disability. Their newfound identity, and they kind of say it's adverse. Well, it's because you're in this new sense of probably finding yourself, and we're trying to find where the boundaries are. You and I were thrust into well, probably had very much similar families in terms of its positive. The outlook as, well, we're not going to wrap you up in cotton wool. We're not going to make you not be a child and be adventurous and be, I'll call it risk adverse, and to make your own mistakes and adapt to as you go along. You kind of go from that basis of trying to find your own way in the world. I think to a certain extent, I would say we're probably wiser beyond our years. Maybe not so much now, but be it when we were kids, we're trying to be very much those engineers, trying to think of outside of this perspective of the norm as to, well, I can't do it the same way as my able-bodied peers. How do I come up with a solution or resolution to something that is as mundane as going on the monkey bars?
Oh, absolutely. I think the way the world has become smaller, the fact that, Amy, you and I are talking across Great Atlantic Ocean, today. So I think the way that things have gotten smaller with social media, there is the potential of finding those connections. And in fact, I think that would be how, me as an adult, I connected with this community of limb difference, limb loss, amputee, however you want to kind of, those different categories. It wasn't until probably 2012 or so, and that, I was on the internet and found a blog by my friend Jen Reeves, who had a blog called Born Just Right. And I started reading that. It was about her daughter and her experience growing up. And I friended Jen and, saw her on Facebook or whatever. And then ultimately found another thing called the Lucky Thin Project, which is another great community resource, both created by mothers of children with limb difference, because they were looking for resources when they were going through their experience. And there wasn't anything out there. So the fact that they created these things helped, I think, create this community that exists, and that community hasn't existed for very long. So I think there was, I think you're absolutely right. The perception of adversity and overcoming adversity that is placed upon someone, especially congenital or anyone that's dealing with limb difference, that's always part of the narrative. And sometimes we don't find a narrative of adaptability and creativity, and that all of us are going to have perhaps those skills come to us a little easier, more naturally because of necessity. But I don't really look back at my life in terms of it was so adverse and I had to do all these things. I do think I certainly had to learn to navigate whether it be the monkey bars in a direct way or learn to navigate certain social situations. You find ways to do that. And I think it certainly, it would have helped to have others like me, other peers like me, to sort of have conversations with and sort of learn from. Because I think having that sort of community is certainly going to be a bit more beneficial than having to figure it out by yourself. So that's why I love that this community is continuing to grow and support each other.
Do you think it also helps from the supportive sense of, and this is probably a sentiment that you've heard when you were growing up as well, is, you can't do this, you can't do that. I don't think you'll be able to do it based on my perception or perspective of you having a disability.
Oh, sure. I think that still exists. I think it's slowly changing. I think it's and I think that's certainly, just to tie back into Camp No Limits. I think the idea of no limits was this idea that let's keep pushing past those limitations, whether they're coming from ourselves or whether they're coming from someone else. Let's keep pushing, and let's find ways that we can continue to figure out how we can best accomplish that activity. And maybe we're not going to do the activity the same as everybody else, but we're going to work and we're going to adapt. We're going to find the ways that we're going to that we can accomplish that goal. So I think it's I certainly had in my time playing sports. I played baseball and football, American football, predominantly growing up. And I had coaches who would say, David, you can't do this, or you're not going to do this. And I think there was an initial drive just to push and push and push to prove that I was gonna do it. And so I think, like I said, now I think these young people who are coming up in this generation that is sort of, I think, had a little bit more support, had a little bit more of a community. They know if someone tells them they can't do something, that that person's lying to them. They know internally that they've seen it. They've seen other people accomplish things. They've seen other people do things. And so they're going to find a way and to adapt and get it done the way that they want to get it done. And so I think that's why I think when I keep saying it's going to be amazing to watch this new generation continue to accomplish things, because, there's not a lot of history. Congenital amputees have existed for a very long time, but there's not a lot of history about us. And so if you go a couple generations ahead of us, those guys and those men and women didn't have, for the most part, an awareness of society, and so I think the awareness that society has now is also attributing to the potential for what people are going to accomplish. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Because I think we were fortunate, probably in our generation, that our parents. I think the culture was sort of shifting, mid 20th century. So as we go into that later part of the 20th century, people were kind of saying like, people with disabilities or people who are physically different probably can accomplish things, and we don't need to actually hide them away, or we don't need to put them away. There is an ability there, and so some shift in, I think, thank goodness for our parents that there was some shift society-wise and cultural-wise that they began to be like, oh, right, my kid's probably going to be able to do whatever they would like to do, and we're able to support us, and we're able to sort of help push us. And I think that's just continued to grow for the last 40, 50 years, I think. And that's, again, just that real exciting thing of what we're going to see and what we're going to see people accomplishing and doing in the very near future.
And I think also, David, and this is going to paraphrase from a previous episode I did with Donovan, what's his surname? Donovan Martin. Mm-hmm. He looked at things from a clinical psychology perspective, but I'll put a disability spin on it. Of obviously, athletes are very much ones to be able to persevere but they lack their purpose. Whereas I think with what you just said there, you and I had a perseverance to obviously prove people wrong when we were younger. Whereas now this younger generation that you talk with, Camp No Limits, they have a purpose as to why they're going to have that perseverance to strive to push the limits.
Right. And I think they're finding it in community, and they're finding it in these very interesting ways. There was a camp last summer. We do sort of a teen camp that's more specifically just the teens. It's more about leadership and teamwork and building those sort of muscles for campers. And so that's the one camp that's a little bit different, where we don't have families. It's just really for the teens. It's really we do whitewater rafting, and they do some ropes courses and some other training with a fantastic group called Adventure Bound up in Maine. And there was like this interesting, sort of home base where there's like a little lodge, and there's like a swimming pool and hot tub. And we got back, and our campers were sort of like kind of hanging out the hot tub. And then we needed to go watch a video of the whitewater rafting we just did. So we went up to watch the video, and some other kids from other groups had taken over the hot tub area. And, as we left, and then that other group, their video was starting. So they all left, and we kind of snuck back into our campers kind of snuck back to that hot tub, and they were like, okay, guys, we can't leave the hot tub because we don't want the forelemmers to take it back. and I had never heard anyone say that, but it was a hilarious thing of camaraderie and sort of celebrating, their group. And again, some of the forelemmers were probably cute. So, they let the forelemmers come in, and join them. But it was this very funny thing of like, no, we'll have to, take this spot so the forelemmers don't take it back. And so I think that was kind of a fun thing for me to see, was that this group of young kids were finding a support with each other and finding pride, within their limb difference. So that was kind of a cool thing. I think it took me a very long time to have pride. I think I stopped wearing prosthetics probably moving into high school, simply because I played sports better without prosthetic. My identity was really connected to sports. So the social identity sort of kind of merged with that athletic identity. So I felt like I didn't need to wear it. But it was probably much longer before I kind of felt like, oh yeah, this is me. And then I have no reason to feel at odds or uncomfortable because I'm going to make someone stare or someone's going to point at me. So that, to see those kind of young kids embracing that pride was really, really kind of cool.
Do you think they have a better, obviously, awareness of their disability? They're at one with their identity, and to a certain extent, what was the final point I was going to make? And have an acceptance of who they are. It's at one. It's not a disparity between. I'll use myself because I'm no different with you in terms of the example. I'm two different people. I'm James with a disability, and then James I want to be within sports, and you're probably the same, David. Do you think they have that very much, that connection is one identity, and it all is ever comes, and there's one individual, and you can either take me for who I am or not?
I think it depends on the individual, right? I think each one of them are going to be wonderfully and uniquely different. I think more and more you're seeing an embrace of that concept of like, this is me, this is all of, whether I'm missing both legs, I'm missing my arm or whatever that may be. This is part of who I am. And this is all the things that I do. And that's just makes me a kid, or makes me a teenager, makes me a person. And my limb difference or disability is one of many, many, many things that define who I am. Right. So there's not, I think it's becoming more incorporated with, hopefully, their identity. I hope that's sort of what I think we try, at camp to instill, is this idea of a full and healthy, independent lifestyle that, and you still have a lot of kids that are coming, from small towns or something, kind of close to where I grew up. I grew up in a real small town, never seeing anyone like me. And again, their parents never really seeing anyone like their kid. And the parents are trying to figure out, like, how's my kid going to do this or that? And then I think bringing everybody together, you kind of begin to see that. So I do think I'm seeing more of I think a majority of the young people I see, I feel like their limb difference is really truly just a part of their identity, which I think is a place that I am now. I think my limb difference is absolutely a part of my identity. It's part of the work I do. It's part of my life. But it took me a longer time to get there, I think, than some of these other kids.
Do you think, and also this probably goes nicely with what we were discussing before with that research paper that I was talking to you about from the American University in Cairo, in terms of, I think they're better placed now because they're not trying to conventionalize themselves and trying to fit in. They're very much at one with being, okay, quote unquote, like the black sheep of the group. I'm okay with being on the outside of that because it makes me unique. It makes me be the individual who I am. Whereas you and I were probably brought up to believe, well, we need to probably get to as close as normal as we can be to not stand out and be left behind. Whereas I think where popular culture and kind of way of thinking now with anything to do with limb difference, amputation, disability in general, is kind of going the other way. Let's jazz things up. Let's make it unique to you, kind of your style of fashion, and make you, make the additional, be it if you have a limb, a prosthetic, it's a fashion accessory. Whereas you go back to when I was a teenager before that, it's very much cosmetic and you're trying to fit in. And I think I pushed back against that because it could never get my complexion right, be it because well, obviously people listening can't see what I look like, but I'm go darker in the summer. So if they make the leg there, they make the prosthetic darker. And then I'd get lighter in the winter. So they would never match and vice versa. So I kind of went against the grain. Let's do something completely different. And I think I went with, I think like 14, 15 with something that looks, I think it was like red was my first one. And then I had a secondary one was blue, and people thought I tattooed my whole entire leg. It's like, well, it's obviously unconventional. It's like, no, it's not a tattoo. All it is a lining, but it's been recognized for being different. It's like, well, I just had enough of being, if you can't get it perfect, then might as well not bother and do something that's completely different.
Right. No, I absolutely. I think now, and I'm sure if you talk to prosthetists, they would say, they could probably point to, at some point, there's been a tipping point, and now it's moving much to in a direction where it's prosthetics are being customized to each individual, and each individual is finding a way to express themselves. I think that's certainly happening more and more. I think still, I have friends who do use cosmetic prosthetics, and it's part of their identity, it's part of what their choice, and I think there's still a place for that. I think it's sort of finding where your comfort and your zone is. But I had the same experience. I would get the skin tone, and it would never be right. And I would get darker in the summer, and I lived down near the ocean, and so it would be at the beach all the time, and I would certainly get much darker, and then lighter in the winter. It just never matched, never felt right, and but yeah, I remember, being wanting to have something that that allowed me to blend in, or the thought that I would blend in. And then, but it was this big myoelectric hand that had a big battery pack that kind of like came out to like here, and it was never really gonna blend somebody in. But then it almost became a tool for me to connect with people, because people thought it was fun, and they thought it was cool, that it was different. So I would take it off, and kids would play with it, open and close it, and I would show them how it worked, and that would be this sort of icebreaker in some weird way. It wasn't that I was blending in. It was like, oh, I've got this cool thing that's a little different. And now I think having either, whether they be the 3D printed arms or the hero arms that are coming out for upper extremity, and I think lower extremity, just the technology that's come across with your within computerized knees, just giving so much more access to lower extremity amputees, I think. And then again, you've got your sports team, or you've got some other kind of thing that's part of your identity that you're able to share, you're able to put out in the world. And I think that's very cool. And absolutely, this younger generation is got that space. They're just like, they're proud of who they are, and that's what's really cool.
And do you think, from the sporting sense, and this is what we had discussed as well before coming on air, was like having somebody that has made it to the pinnacle of the NFL. You were talking about one of the baseball players in the major leagues. And basketball's yet to make that stride, but there has been people with limb difference make it to the collegiate level. Do you think because people are very much aware of that, through the nature of what is social media, it's like, well, even if a teacher or a coach says to me, I can't aspire to make that, I can see it from my own perspective and from my own eyes. It's like, well, who says I can't? Somebody's laid the path and laid the foundations already. Who is it for me to not aspire to be able to make it if I put in the work to be able to attain that?
Right. No, I think absolutely. I think that's when we talk about that sort of representation that's been out there that we've seen, especially in athletics. And I think it's also helped because if you think Jim Abbott, who was the pitcher who pitched in the major leagues, he sort of began to get attention, in the mid to late 1980s. 30 or 40 some odd years ago. So within that 40 years, there have been coaches who have heard of his story, or began to hear about him. And there's a kid that comes out into the ball field that is missing a limb, and that coach may have seen that story that Jim Abbott was pitching in the major leagues. He was the number one draft pick, or drafted in the first round of the major league draft. That coach would say, oh, wait, instead of saying, oh, this kid's never going to play, I'm never going to play, he's seen that reflection too. So he's going to be able to put that time and effort in with that kid and help that kid find the confidence. So I think it's happening in both sort of ways. You're seeing, number one, the kids have that kind of drive, but then also from a coaching perspective, the coaches are now saying, I'm not just going to write this off right now. I'm going to let this kid have a chance to prove themselves. And I think that's a positive thing too. And I think we're seeing more and more and more of that. So I think that's fantastic that we're seeing kind of both of those things. I work as an actor, so my goal is I want to show more reflection of limb difference, limb loss in our arts and media, and we're beginning to see a little bit more of that. We see it more specifically in authentic portrayals, but we are beginning to see more. If the character's an amputee, we're beginning to see more amputee actors play those roles. An actor's a wheelchair user, we're beginning to see more of those roles. What we're still working on is how do we have an amputee or a person in a wheelchair, a little person, etc., just play a role that doesn't have anything to do with that disability or that identity. It's just a guy who's picking up some chips at the store. That's what continue to want to see a little bit more of. But I think even in that reflection, that begins to show limb difference and disability reflected in ways that aren't specifically, tied just to sort of one kind of industry or one, sort of just to athletics, that we're seeing it represented in a variety of different ways. So there's a broader sense of the things that you can accomplish and the things that you could do with limb difference. It's not just sort of like, here's the one thing. I mean, I realized growing up, I love playing baseball, but Jim Abbott's left arm was like a fighter jet. My left arm was more like a propeller plane, I mean, I remember coming to the realization, like, I'm not able to get that ball up to 96, 97 miles an hour. I can throw in the high 80s and I play pretty well, and then in my path, my personal path, I just sort of found my way into performing and realizing that's something I wanted to do. And it sort of diverged a little bit from there, but there was no role model for me to, kind of have an awareness that this was a possibility. I think I was just hard-headed enough and driven enough to want to do it.
Well, I think you're accustomed to hearing the no. You've heard the no's so many. It's like, well, it's another one I can brush aside. Yeah,
right.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
It's not. That's exactly. Not doing me any good. I'm going to keep going forward. And be it from that basis. But obviously, I'm going to get your personal opinion on this now, David. In terms of you, and I can't remember what the movie was called. The one with The Rock where he played an amputee.
Oh, sure.
What would you ideally like to see? And obviously, this is your own opinion now. Yeah. Would you have liked to have seen an actual amputee play that role?
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to see my friend Kurt Yeager play it. He's, Kurt Yeager is not Dwayne Johnson. Dwayne Johnson, as the producers of that film were going to say Dwayne Johnson's name and everything else was going to draw in a certain amount of audience. And Kurt Yeager, who is a fantastic actor, and there's some other actors who are leg amputees too that have a good bit of experience. But Kurt's an actor who was on Sons of Anarchy. He's on NCIS New Orleans recently, had a pretty good guest star arc. He's an actor that's been working and grinding that potentially could carry that film, that he hasn't had the opportunity to carry something like that. And so the producers are going to be a little wary of that, et cetera. I think, Dwayne Johnson made a public service announcement saying, we should cast actors with disabilities to play characters with disabilities, because they felt the pressure of organizations kind of calling out that decision. And I get that it's a financial decision, but I think if you're going to make that decision that you're going to cast an actor without a disability to play a disabled character, where are you including actors with disabilities to begin to get that experience? Because if your argument is that there's not an actor with the experience to do this, where are you providing opportunities for those actors? And so I think right now, the way I think the business is going, that argument still exists, that there's not enough actors with perhaps the experience to do certain things. But I think the industry is working a little bit better to cast roles and to provide opportunities for actors with disabilities to begin to get that experience. And I think it's still, there's, the broad scope of diversity, there's a lot of work that is being done and still needs to be done. But trying to include disability in that larger conversation of diversity is kind of a constant issue and constant thing that people are working on. But I think we have made some strides. I mean, you're seeing more. We had our first actress who's a wheelchair user win a Tony Award this past year. You're seeing, I think, more authentic representation. I know that the Casting Society of America, at least the casting directors, are for the most part trying to make a concerted effort to find actors with disabilities to try to cast as best they can authentically. But when you have millions and millions of dollars at stake, that becomes a tricky thing. And so I think ideally you want to see an amputee actor. I think if they would have cast an amputee actor, I think the potential of the film probably as well as it did could be made. I think you could make that argument, because I think the narrative of the amputee actor playing the role would have garnered as much press. But there's no way to.
There's more authenticity to the storyline,
right? Because it's more authentic. And I think what people are starting to learn is that that's what audiences want. I think right now audiences we are craving more authenticity, and so the more we lean into that, I think the better engagement you're going to have. I think if you look at the film Peanut Butter Falcon that's coming out, I mean, I think they had to fight really hard for their plan of authenticity, but the whole project was based on a character with a disability. They wrote the whole movie with an actor in mind, kind of, and the authenticity makes that film very special. And that's garnered the attention, that's garnered the buzz, that's garnered the success that the film has had. I don't think the film would have had that success had they not really, really been committed to the authenticity of telling that story.
But then obviously coming back to your point with Camp No Limits, do you think it gives the kids a greater sense of, and I'm going to play a little bit on obviously what my pillars, my business are, have a greater sense of adaptability to the environment, because they're going to get to know peers throughout their area of the United States, because you said there was multiple camps, and then they've got those everlasting friendships, connections, relationships, and also networking from that basis, which I think will probably enable them going forward to master whatever craft they go into, because they've got and built underlying like fundamental key relationships that they've built over a number of years to be able to call upon somebody, be it in whatever field that may be in, to say, well, I have a question on this. Can I ask you that? And I think it gives a little bit more sense of not necessarily vulnerability, but coming back to that authenticity perspective, the other person has lived those hardships as well. So when they talk about a specific topic or a specific program or a project in mind, that person can then envision as well, this is what I'm thinking about it. I'm coming from the same mold as you as somebody with a limb difference. Here's then my contribution to you. Do you think this is where the younger generation are going to be best placed, because they've got those everlasting connections going forward? So be it if they do hit on rough times, they've got that support network to say, well, you've done it before, you can do it again.
I think so. I think you hit right on it. I think our campers are really connecting and making these sort of friendships that are really existing throughout their lives. And I think some of these campers who sort of these original campers that kind of started in 2004, 5, 6, they're all reaching young adulthood. And I think if you talk to them, they still kind of connect. They still kind of catch up with each other. And I think if push, they could reach out when times are tough to those friends who've sort of been through some of the same challenges and things perhaps that they may face. And I think probably most of them would say challenges aren't necessarily dealing with limb difference or anything like that. The challenges are just freaking life and figuring out, like, relationships and figuring out work and figuring out, all those kinds of things. But having that kind of support system coming from not only hopefully your family and some of the, the other connections you make, but from someone who has had a similar lived experience, can make some sense. And I think I find that, in my personal life too, I think it's, there's certainly folks that offer me guidance and support, but having someone that has had that lived experience is so much more powerful, and in some ways a little more, I don't know if deeper is the right word, but having some frank conversations with some of the other adult mentors that I've met over these last several years, and the friendships I've made there have been very important to me. And I think absolutely that sort of comes down into our campers, and you think about how much of a bond those relationships are coming out of 7, 8, 9, 10 years of going through these camps and really developing these friendships. I think it's a huge part, a huge contribution that just overall community is really doing.
Do you think it going against the grain a little bit of obviously, if you look at the greater sense of what is society, people are more inclined to be like you and I were, we've done it in the past ourselves. Mm-hmm. When we come up with hardship, what is life? Oh, I'm going to do it again like that because I came up the other side. Whereas I think that's, generally speaking, the wrong way about it and to do it, because this hardship you may have encountered now is maybe tenfold of what you've experienced in the past, and you probably didn't envision that there is a support network behind you anyway, be it friends, family, and you to kind of to certain extent probably downplay it. It's like, well, I did it myself, where probably in reality you didn't. But then you try and reenact that same way in thinking as an adult, and you literally do it by yourself, and then you struggle, and you kind of think to myself, what's the difference? Do you think because they have that social bond from such a young age, they have no problem reaching out, be it however big the magnitude of the problem is?
Well, I hope so. I think, again, it comes down to each individual, right? So every individual is going to be different. And I think it's in the DNA still of our culture is that, we're going to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. We got to get this, and it's just us. It's me against the world, and I'm going to accomplish this, and I'm going to do everything myself. And I think you're absolutely right. When we take that step back in our consciousness and say, wait a second, all the things that I accomplished there were a lot of people who were supporting me. There were a lot of people around me, and so I think sometimes we have to take that step back because we do have to sort of push a little harder. And that's sort of what we've learned to do. I do hope the work that we're doing now is laying that groundwork of allowing. It's sort of like, I think we have the icon for Camp No Limits is a heart, right? And it doesn't necessarily look just like a heart. It's all these different sort of shapes that kind of make a heart. Because the idea for us and why the heart is so important is our differences that unite us, right? And it really brings us together. And so it's all the differences that are coming into camp, whether it's the difference of the limb difference, the difference of experience, the difference of circumstances, situation, all of those differences are coming in. And yet all of those differences are truly what's uniting us. And so it's embracing those differences. And that's sort of what makes the heart of camp happen, right? So those connections that are made through these years, and those bonds that are created have really sort of been beating together for a while, and I do hope that certainly it's in our mission that we are providing that opportunity for that empowerment, but those connections and laying groundwork and space for them to grow and to develop. But I can't tell you how many camps that I go to that you see these the kids, this sort of like they connect with. They may find one kid that's just like, oh my gosh, you're like my doppelganger or something, like you're like me, and I've never seen this before, and I can't get over it. And they're inseparable, and you do love seeing those connections. And I think, I certainly think so. I hope that they're going to be able to lean on each other, and they're going to be able to find that way to support. So it's not just the adult mentors. It's not just the staff of camp that's really offering that support, but ultimately it's coming from that internal heartbeat that is the lifeblood of the camp.
So, David, let me ask you this question then. Where do you see the future hold for Camp No Limits?
Well, I certainly hope we continue to grow. I think, excuse me, sorry, I had to get some water. I think it's a lot of talking. I would love to see us continue to grow. I mean, we talk a lot about, I think there are like 12, 13, 1,400 births a year that, deal with limb difference. And then you add in amputees through trauma or other means. There's a lot of folks who haven't heard about us, who don't know that we exist as a resource. So I would like to see us continue to develop and get a few more camps across the country to continue just the work that we're doing. Because, we're, for the most part, our camps are pretty close to capacity, which is a great thing to have going on. But for us to continue to grow and continue to do our mission, and to continue to support, continue to educate, continue to empower those young people and their families that haven't heard about us yet, who may not even know, who may not have found the resources like we've, now with the internet, you're finding a lot of things, but they may not have that may not have found that community. They may have not found that sort of vein of the internet that kind of gets them there. So I would like to see us continue to develop and to grow. And I think that's what we're certainly working toward. Right now is really kind of continuing to really focus on our staff and focus on the potential of how we can grow in the future.
Do you ever see it going internationally as well, then?
Yeah, we need to be in, jolly old England, man. We need to get over there. And I'm not sure. I mean, I would love it. I mean, if we're able to kind of do that, because obviously, like we said, I mean, kids with limb difference are everywhere, and we have been everywhere. Our communities haven't grown, and so when you really try to find the support system, we have an organization that has been helping provide prosthetics internationally, predominantly to countries that don't have as many resources. So, you go around the world right now, there are a lot of young kids that are amputees that are congenital amputees that have never seen anyone who looks like them, who may feel they're completely alone. So I think there's a potential for a lot of growth, and hope. And I hope, that we're encouraging families and showing the potential, because I still think, and we've been very fortunate and blessed to be in a part of the world that allowed us the opportunity to have knowledge of perseverance, to have knowledge of potential. But I still think there are a lot of places in the world where that might not be given to someone with limb difference or limb loss. And so really trying to expand as much as we can to sort of spread that message of empowerment in the world. I think there are no limits, right? So we're going to keep pushing and trying to figure out like how we can serve as many people as we can.
So my penultimate question to you, David, then is how are we going to break down those barriers of obviously expanding people's knowledge and obviously resources in those areas where their perception and perspective towards be it limb difference, limb loss, is obviously a few years behind, be it the Western world. What do you think it's going to take to be able to probably stop this notion of limits being put on those individuals, and obviously getting them to be able to believe in themselves, like you and I have done when we're growing up, and obviously the next generation to believe there is no limits?
Well, I think it's education, right? It's knowledge. What is the best way to do that? I don't particularly know. I think it's from seeing representation. It's either seeing representation through arts and media, it's potentially seeing representation through athletics and sports. It's potentially just seeing representation through organizations that are and providing that kind of work. And I think it certainly comes down to resources. The work that we do requires resources, and so I think it's people, number one, from our community that like the work that's happening, that want to give back to the work that's happening. I think it's certainly that, but it's also our allies. It's the families we come from. It's the organizations that we work for. The people who have been who have found encouragement, or dare I say inspiration from us, even if that's not what our intent has been. I think there's a inspirational caveat that sometimes gets put on anything that someone does with limb difference or limb loss, that it's so inspiring. And I think that I always sort of push back a little bit. I think that if what I'm doing is encouraging you, then that's fantastic. And I hope you continue to work and find the best part of yourself in a way to be the best person that you can be. I hope that's great. But the fact that I drive a car, or the fact that I get up and make breakfast and make a pot of coffee isn't super inspiring. That I do that with one hand. It's just me. This is me doing my day. It's what I do. So I think it's. But if you have been encouraged and inspired from those of us who are out in the world and doing this kind of work, to support organizations like Camp No Limits, to support other organizations that are out there doing some really good things. And so we'd love. That's the other thing is getting the word out about what we're doing. So I'd love, folks to go to our website, kind of see some of the videos and some of the things that we're doing. I think you're going to like the work that we're doing. If you like it, then help support it. Think about helping us with those resources to be able to continue and to be able to grow. And I think that's kind of ultimately how, it's going to keep expanding. Whether and folks who are coming to Camp No Limits are going to find other ways that they're going to contribute, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to all these different communities. And then hopefully from those different communities, we're going to meet and find opportunities in other parts of the world. I mean, we certainly have folks coming from different parts of the world to our camps here. So it's building those relationships and building the potential for resources to allow us to do more.
So my final question to you, David, before we wrap up the episode is then, if you had to summarize what we've been speaking about today into one sentence for people to take away, what would that be?
It could be a run-on sentence, right? The one sentence is, there is a lot of amazing work being done for young people and adults with limb difference and limb loss across the country, throughout the United States and internationally. My work is with an organization, Camp No Limits, and we are supporting young individuals with limb difference and limb loss and their families. And to change the world, we're going to need your help. We're going to need you to invest in certain resources to help us continue that mission, because this younger generation that is coming up has got some amazing momentum right now, with their knowledge of and acceptance of who they are. And this has turned into a paragraph. Sorry, but the younger generation of amputees and those individuals with limb difference are going to continue to change this world for the better.
So, David, once again, thanks again for coming on the Mindset Athlete podcast.
Of course. Thank you so much for your work and what you're doing.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and thank you very much. If you like this episode, please do share it with your friends, and do let David, Camp No Limits, and I know what you thought of the episode by tagging us over on Instagram at David Harrell 3, that's the number 3, at Camp No Limits, and at James O Roberts 11, and that's the number 11. And you can do the same on Twitter and Facebook. And if you had any questions, don't hesitate to shoot them over as well. And finally, don't forget to give their website a follow at nolimitsfoundation.org. And as always, do check out my free content at fitamputee.co.uk and click on the tab Resources. But not forgetting, I've also started a new Facebook group, especially for the podcast, which you can find by typing The Mindset Athlete. So make sure to check those links out. They will be in the description. You can find all the show notes at mindsetgame.libsyn.com under the category General. So once again, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next week for another episode of the Mindset Athlete podcast.